Sorry, no, I can't. That's okay, no. Thank you, David. Bonjour à toutes, bonjour à tous. Welcome to this World Rugby media briefing to update on decisions taken by the World Rugby Council earlier today. It's great to see you all in the room, probably our biggest attendance of the tournament so far. Also a big hello to those who are joining us online as well from around the world. I'm joined on the top table by World Rugby Chairman Sir Bill Beaumont and World Rugby CEO Alan Gilpin. Before we get going, sorry, apologies, just the usual housekeeping. We do have interpretation. So for those in the room, if you haven't already scanned the QR codes on the screen, please do so to access the interpretation. For those who are online, please do choose your language within the function online. And then for those in the room, we'll take questions first from the floor. Please do raise your hand, wait for the microphone, introduce yourself and ask your question. And we'll then take questions from online. And for those online, you can either raise your virtual hand or pop your question into the chat function. So you'll be pleased to hear that's enough from me on the housekeeping. I'm going to hand straight over to Bill Beaumont. Bill, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dom. Mesdames, Messieurs, bonjour à tous, bonjour à tous. Rugby World Cup 2023 has demonstrated the best of our sport, of France and togetherness, and it's provided a window to the possible, and that made us think, what if? What if unions had the same certainty and opportunity? What if we could align the international and domestic calendars? And what if we could increase revenue investment for all? If rugby is going to become a truly global sport, we simply have to make it more relevant, more accessible to more people around the world. With that in mind, we have reimagined the series, 7 series, introduced WXV, revamped our Rugby World Cup hosting model, and we have led the way in welfare innovation and reshaped our governance. The calendar was the last piece of the jigsaw. We said at the beginning of the tournament, we didn't want to leave France with an uncertain future, the status quo. Positive momentum has been building since the pandemic, and it's brought the game closer together as a whole, and today is the culmination of that unity. It's fitting that we finish this, the sport's greatest celebration of togetherness, with the sport's greatest feat of togetherness, the most significant development in the sport since the game went professional. A new era is about to begin for our sport, an era that will bring certainty and opportunity for all, an era that will support the many, not the few, and an era that will supercharge the development of the sport beyond its traditional and often self-imposed boundaries. All boats will rise together. Today, the World Rugby Council confirmed harmonized women's and men's international calendars from 2026, respectively, that deliver for the first time defined release windows that align the club and international game, enhance player welfare, and provide unprecedented certainty and opportunity for unions with new competitions and increased crossover fixtures in the men's game. An expanded Rugby World Cup 2027 to 24 teams, with a later January 2026 draw. The establishment of a new Pacific Nations Cup involving Fiji, Japan, Samoa, Tonga, Canada, and USA, guaranteeing each country the minimum of 3 fixtures. This is not all about World Rugby unions, competitions, North and South. This is a decision that's been made for the game, and it is that collaborative spirit that I'm most proud of. I'd like to finish with a thank you. Thank you for those who've been committed to this project, who thought about the bigger picture. And also thank you to the players at this Rugby World Cup who've demonstrated that with the right opportunity, new nations will shine on the world stage. The future looks bright, and the stage is set to just get a lot bigger. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Bill. I'm just going to hand over to Alan for a few opening remarks as well. Alan.
Thanks, Dom. Thanks, Bill. Yeah, just to add to that, and maybe talking about historic decisions seems like a very grand way to finish a very great World Cup, but it is really truly a historic day. I mean, Bill and I were reflecting that 16 years ago when we finished the Rugby World Cup in France, in different roles for us at that time, we were involved in the very same discussions. How do we make the global calendar, in that case for the men's game, more relevant, more compelling, better competition structures? And we weren't able to do it 16 years ago. And a number of years ago, we talked about Nations Championships and providing more opportunities, more pathways for the nations that sit outside of the existing closed competitions, and we weren't able to do it. And this set of proposals, this set of decisions have required a huge amount of compromise, a huge amount of movement, a huge amount of collaboration between a lot of stakeholders. And we've been able to land on something that has been really elusive for rugby for a very long time. So, you know, I personally believe it is a truly historic day. As Bill said, a lot of people have worked very hard for a very long time to get us to this point, and we have a better future for men's 15s rugby, and we have a better future for women's 15s rugby to build on the pathways that we've already put in place in sevens rugby. And that's a really, really important opportunity. There are more opportunities. There's more certainty for more nations as a result of today's decisions than there's ever been. It's not perfect. You know, would we all like relegation and promotion and pathways in these competitions to start sooner in some cases than they are? Absolutely. But again, those compromises allow for that type of pathway, that type of relegation to take place in the foreseeable future rather than not in the foreseeable future, which is what the status quo provides. So we're really proud of the decisions that have been made today. And we really look forward to working towards those historic competition models and pathways into the future. And as Bill has said, and as you've seen, all of that is wrapped up with an expanded Men's World Cup in 2027 to go alongside an expanded Women's World Cup even sooner in 2025. And again, more opportunities for more countries to qualify into and play in the pinnacle events in our sport. And we think that's really important. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. We're now going to take questions on the floor, so please do raise your hand. Just a reminder, this is a World Rugby briefing, not a Rugby World Cup briefing. We took Rugby World Cup questions yesterday, so this is just on the future of the sport. But first question, yep, Stephen. Just here.
Bill, you mentioned the word unity about 4 times there. And unless our personal sources are lying to us, the vote was very close and could have actually been overturned if one major country had decided to vote that they didn't want it. Isn't that just a disunity which should not be marked by the final week of the World Cup? Because it was incredibly close, and loads of people in the room that you were in last night didn't agree with what you just said about the new rugby.
Look, certain countries will have their own views on matters. I think if you look at it, it's quite a significant sort of majority of votes in favour. You know, you need to 2/3 majority to overturn. It's not a straight 50%, but I'd like to think around the room there might have been a few dissenters, but on the whole, it's a pretty significant vote in favour of these new competitions.
Thank you.
But you mentioned Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, Japan. You didn't mention Chile and Uruguay that played in this World Cup, and they brought their flavor to the tournament. What's in stage for them, for countries like them?
What do I say to Uruguay? That they will continue, I think, to play in the South American competition. That they will have the opportunity going forward, you know, like everybody else, to get involved in them. Look, we you know, immensely proud of what Uruguay have done. You know, if you think that they were outstanding in this world, and look also at a team like Portugal. Portugal sort of without something like this are hampered with the quality of fixtures that they got. Now, going forward, it doesn't start immediately, but it gives Portugal a really great opportunity now to plan forward, and other countries who didn't qualify for the World Cup as well. So Samoa have not got a fixture next year.
I think it's important to add as well. I mean, today has been decisions around global competition structures for the future, pinnacle events, men's and women's rugby World Cups, as we've said, and the concept of a Nations Cup or Nations Championship being played every other year, an opportunity for the likes of Uruguay and Chile to qualify for that competition and be in that competition, and eventually have opportunities for relegation and promotion to the top division of that competition, opportunities they've never had anywhere in the men's professional game previously. We've now got to work closely and quickly with the regional associations to understand what opportunities they want to build the competition structures that support those global competitions. And in some cases, and in the revised Nations Cup that we've Pacific Nations Cup that we've talked about today, some unions have moved very quickly to take advantage of those opportunities. Others haven't.
Thanks, Alan. You spoke about the barriers to that promotion and relegation. Pretty much every tier 2 coach who went out from this tournament said we need more meaningful games. They're going to be saying the same in 2027, and it looks like they're going to be saying the same in 2031. So you could say almost sacrificing an entire generation of players. What are the barriers, and why couldn't you give that promotion relegation a bit more quickly?
Look, again, I think it's all about compromise. It's all about understanding, you know, what each different stakeholder in the game is holding on to and perceived to be giving up to create these opportunities. And again, it might seem like a long time away. It's not in the scheme of the amount of time. Again, 16 years ago, these conversations started, and here we are finally landing the first part of this. So, you know, promotion relegation from 2030 taking effect in 2032 is certainly better than the alternative, which is not to have that competition at all. And again, those that were pushing for this not to happen, as has been referenced, weren't putting forward alternatives that were credible. I think what we'd say to the teams, Portugal, Chile, others that have had fantastic tournaments here is this competition structure from 2026 will provide them with guaranteed certain schedules, particularly against their peers, actually the types of teams they need to be playing against in July and November on an annual basis. In addition, the package that's agreed today provides for more crossover fixtures, what we used to call tier 1 and tier 2 fixtures in the years when this championship isn't being played than is currently the case. So 50% more guaranteed crossover fixtures in those other years than is currently the case, in addition to guaranteed fixtures against their peers that they don't currently have. And it isn't just about those opportunities to play against the teams that are ranked higher. As Bill said, if you're Samoa or you're USA or you're Portugal, other than your current regional competition, you have no guaranteed fixtures next year or in 2025 or in 2026. These competition models start to guarantee July fixtures, November fixtures with real meaning, scheduled in advance, and then in the years in between, the opportunity to be part of those crossover fixtures. So, you know, again, is it perfect? Probably not. Is it a hell of a lot better than the current situation? Absolutely.
Hi there, Nathan Williamson, rugby.com.au. I was just wondering, you talk about in 2007, these conversations were starting, but you know, you two were sort of there for it. Why now do you think the sort of world rugby is more receptive to it and it's now sort of become a sort of concrete idea that will come into place?
I don't think it was ever World Rugby weren't receptive to it. I mean, those conversations, it was called the Integrated Season Forum back in 2007. I'm not going to cast any aspersions on the town of Woking where we met. That wasn't the reason. You know, it takes a long time in rugby, as you've all seen, to make that kind of progress. You know, rugby has the challenges of being a very big sport in a small number of places, and it takes time to break those barriers down. It takes time, I think, to bring stakeholders with us. We've had a number of failed attempts to put in place a regular global competition that provides more opportunity and more pathways for all. And again, I think coming out of COVID, there's a greater understanding from the whole of the rugby ecosystem that we're in this together. If rugby is going to thrive and flourish and grow as a sport, we have to work together. At the international level, I think what this process has shown is that we have to work together with the domestic clubs, leagues, everybody's investing in the game. And again, this is taken compromise by every stakeholder in the sport. No one comes away from this thinking they've got everything they wanted. Maybe that's the tribute to a good deal, is that everyone's had to give something here to get to where we are. And people have been more prepared to do that and more prepared to be part of that conversation. I think that certainly in our experience than ever before. And the same's true in the women's game. You know, we've got real clarity in the calendar for the women's game. And that's really important at a time when the women's game is evolving and professionalizing quickly. And we need to make sure that we've got certainty for those people that are putting competition models in place, but also a recognition that as that evolution happens, there's going to need to be a regular review process to evolve that global calendar, to change those windows as needed, to make sure we're providing the best landscape for everybody involved. And at the heart of both packages in the men's and women's game is a recognition that the answer cannot be, in terms of creating more value and creating more relevant content, can't be creating more load on the players. So player load guidelines and the idea of player load management tools right at the heart of this.
Yeah. Hi, Alan. Try and squeeze two in if I can. The first one's really just about the crossover fixtures, the guarantees. I can understand how it works in a Lions year, maybe less so in a World Cup year. If you can maybe explain, like, will the old Tier 1 nations guarantee that their World Cup warm-up matches, as they have been, will then be including the old Tier 2 countries? And you know, how can you hold them to account and make sure that they do fulfill commitments that may be made today, but down the line may try and wriggle out of that?
Yeah, great question. Look, I think exactly that. So really the focus on this idea of crossover fixtures between the sort of established nations and the performance nations, and what will become a group of 12 in the top division of that global competition, and then the next group of 12, and then into regional competitions. And it's important to say as well that just because promotion and relegation between the Division 1 and Division 2 will start in 2030 to take effect in 2032 doesn't mean that has to be the case in the second division with pathways with the regional competitions. There's more work to do on that, but we're really keen to make sure that happens as quickly as possible once the competitions have had the chance to be established. And exactly to your point there, you know, this is about looking at the other years, traditionally what we would call Lions years and the Rugby World Cup years, and populating those periods with fixtures that allow those opportunities. And exactly as you suggested, the high performance unions agreeing that some of their Rugby World Cup warm-up matches have to be against those other teams.
Just quickly, secondly, on the World Cup in 27 going to 24 teams, and I think it's going to go to 6 weeks. I'm just really interested how that is going to work and how you'll fix the extra teams in, but within a shorter time frame, which I'm sure will be welcomed by all.
It sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? And it's been interesting. And again, we've looked at 24 team expansions for Rugby World Cups many times in the last sort of decade or so. And you know, you can always convince yourself it's not the right time to be that bold. And you know, in part, as is happening so much in our game, what we've done with the women's game is actually leading now what we're doing with the men's game, because we took that step to expand from 12 to 16 teams in the women's game and understood that you've got to work hard then with the competition models that surround that to bring those next 4 teams to the right level of competitiveness. In the men's format, we've looked at many formats of a 24 team tournament, and there are many formats. If we move to a format of 6 pools of 4 teams, so you have 3 pool matches rather than 4 pool matches for each team, but you add around the 16 additional knockout content, you can basically still have the minimum 5-day rest periods, but bring that schedule back into a tournament that is 6 weeks and 7 weekends long, not what we're seeing here, which is 7 weeks and 8 weekends long, which you know, I know all of you amongst others would be pleased to see.
Hi there, Sarah Orchard, BBC. You've spoken about it being a global calendar for the men and for the women. At the moment, WXV is a little bit anonymous because it's clashing with this World Cup. Can you talk us through, you say the windows are movable, if they will be continue to clash, or you'll move them if it suits for them to be on the same weekends? How will that work?
Yeah, great question. So we've got a challenge with WXV and the global release window in the future for the women's global calendar being obviously in the same window effectively as the men's Rugby World Cup. So we're facing into the same problem as we look at 2027. But there's a commitment in the work that's been done again across the whole range of stakeholders in the women's game to review the women's calendar on a pretty regular basis. So I think there'll be work done on that. There's work to look at around the format of WXV and how that can be best optimized in those years and in the future. So more work to do, and certainly a desire to give as much clear air to the women's global competitions as we can, but the reality is we face that calendar challenge.
Yeah, Television New Zealand down in the cheap seats. Question for CEO or chair: in the World Rugby meetings the last couple of days, how happy have the global nations been with this World Cup? There's been some disgruntlement about organisation and logistics. Also, yes, this World Cup has to make a lot of money for World Rugby. So will we ever see it back in a small country like New Zealand?
Small country, maybe in population terms. I wouldn't describe New Zealand as a small country in rugby terms. Yeah, exactly. Look, World Cups, and particularly a World Cup on this scale, the biggest World Cup we've ever had, are really complex beasts to organise, not without their challenges. France have been a great host. They were a great host previously for Rugby World Cups. I'm sure they'll be a great host of future rugby events. I think where we've had challenges, we've worked hard with the organising committee, the government and other stakeholders here to find solutions and move forward. I think we've had, you know, some amazing rugby. We've certainly seen an amazing tournament off the field, the fans that have brought incredible atmospheres, not just to the stadiums and more people in the stadiums than ever before, but actually to the rugby villages, you know, to cities around the country and indeed the global audiences we've had for the sport. So, you know, on any measure, we've had, I think, an amazing tournament. That's not to say we can always find things to do better. There are a lot of learnings for the future, as always. Yes, this World Cup is going to drive record revenues and record opportunities to invest in the future. And a lot of what we're talking about today in terms of developing new competition models is about using that money to drive more opportunity and more investment for everybody. And that starts with investing in regional competitions that start to really build the base in the men's and women's game and in sevens for that opportunity. And then through those competition models into what we're describing today. But ultimately, rugby moves forward if we're investing more in everybody moving forward. New Zealand as a host right now for WXV and as a host in all those forms in the future.
Yeah, next question.
Continuing with the theme of investing in everybody, Kenya, Uganda, Zambia play in the Victoria Cup this coming weekend. Have the decisions the council made this week made it easier for any of those three countries to potentially play in a World Cup?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. You know, there's no doubt about it that sort of the investment in the new competition there will go from regional competition to be qualified. And I think what it'll do, it will enhance the regional competition because they actually see there is a pathway now for countries. If you are good enough, then you can then play whatever level that you can actually aspire to. So certainly, yeah, no problem at all with that.
Hi, just around the finance, how much more money is this new competition going to bring into the game? And what guarantees are there specifically that it won't be just the rich getting richer?
I think like any new competition, that question gets answered a little bit when you start to sell it and take it to market. You know, the belief is, and the work that's been done that supports the belief is that there is additional value. Ultimately, and again, we saw this in the work we did on the Nations Championship concept, you know, pre-COVID, if you're creating something that provides more meaning and more relevance and more interest for fans, that will translate into greater revenues over time. Media rights, more brands interested in being associated, you know, higher ticket revenues, etc. That takes time to build. And that's one of the reasons why in the discussions with the different groups of stakeholders, the idea of not bringing promotion relegation in immediately has been important to a number of stakeholders. They want to build these divisions and have them established before potentially there's movement between the two. You know, we're in a competition model where you're going to have the existing Six Nations and Rugby Championship nations in that top division, bringing two further teams in, amazing opportunity for those two further teams to participate at that top level. And then we'll be funding in the first instance, rather than generating funds, funding that second division of 12 and establishing that as quickly as possible and working hard with all of those stakeholders to maximize the revenues across the whole piece. So, you know, the suggestions that this just makes the rich richer, I think, are misplaced, because this is about creating a better landscape. And even in the regional competition level, not only are further investment, are increased investment from these competition models to the regions, to the question about Rugby Africa or Asia Rugby, but actually, how do those competitions, how do those regions, how do those countries attract more funding from other stakeholders, be that government, be that national Olympic committees? And if you don't provide them the opportunity to be in global competitions, they can't access that investment. So this is rugby's opportunity to grow its pie as a whole rather than just grow the same pie for a few.
We'll come back to
I appreciate you can't probably give too many details, but I'm just wondering if you can talk broadly about what the review into the allegations made by Curry looks like and when we could expect a verdict on that.
Yeah, I mean, we spoke about it yesterday. We can't add any more to that statement. As I said, this is a World Rugby briefing rather than a Rugby World Cup related briefing, but we will update you as soon as we have something to update. But the aim is to do that review as quickly as possible. The first part of the review is about gathering evidence, so we'll update as soon as we can. Thank you. Yeah, next question.
Alan, can I just ask, the decision to bring the draw back to January 26th, I think Phil said, is that an acceptance that it was too early this time? And it's still 20 months before the tournament and before the Nations Championship happens. Is it still too early, or why did you why is it so early? I guess is the question.
Yeah, look, good question. Is it a recognition this one was too early? And I think we've said this a few times. I mean, I understand that there's frustration, the timing of the draw for this World Cup. And I think the reality is, and sometimes this is a little bit lost, we were in the middle of a global pandemic. Nobody was playing international rugby at the time that the draw was made for this tournament. So we were using effectively the rankings that existed from the end of the last tournament. And that was really important in order to be able to plan for the great tournament that we've now had, and, give teams and fans, and those investing in the tournament, the stakeholders that invest in this tournament, the opportunity to move that planning forward. So, but of course, it leads to the challenges or the frustrations that we've had here. There's always been a recognition that we want to change that, I think, and have the draw closer to the tournament. when you actually drill down into that, what you quite quickly realize, if you're going to have a draw that's based on the integrity of global rankings in Rugby World Cups, is that there's a relatively narrow window between the end of the November internationals and the start of the next Six Nations in the men's rankings when everybody's played. And the moment you go beyond that, some nations have had the opportunity to improve their rankings and some haven't until the end of the next November internationals. And we've taken the view for Rugby World Cup in Australia in 2027 that waiting until after the November internationals in 2026 would be too late. I think it would put ticket sales at risk, and that puts the financing of the tournament at risk. I think fans would be very frustrated with that outcome of not being able to plan with any certainty with less than a year to a Rugby World Cup. And it would make a real challenge, particularly at a time of expansion to 24 teams, to plan for the infrastructure that's needed for that expansion. So the moment we've taken the decision not to go as late as effectively 10 months before Rugby World Cup, then we're back to January 2026. So hopefully, again, it's a compromise, but a better one than we've had now.
Alan, can you just explain how removing a rest week in the Six Nations is beneficial for player welfare?
Yeah, look, good question. And again, compromise is required by all parties. There's been a huge amount of work with international rugby players and the national players associations on player load guidelines and the need for those player load guidelines to reflect a number of important principles moving forward when players have their rest periods, how those rest periods are guaranteed depending on when where your international and club rugby is played, and therefore what blocks of, in this case, international rugby lead to in terms of rest. And there's a lot more work to do on that. And obviously we're talking about changes that will take effect in 2026, and a lot more work to do with the professional leagues who've been fully part of these discussions on when those rest periods occur. The reality is that to make the global calendar work for the range of stakeholders that we've got, if we're adding something in late November, we've got to give that back to the professional leagues somewhere else. And that's what's led to those discussions. But managing the player load around that, which is not a one-size-fits-all player load discussion, but individualized player load management, is a really central part of that.
Hi, Derek Foley from Ireland. Could you just explain to us how you actually win this competition and this new competition? And there is a grand final, is that right?
Yes. The idea is, Jerry, to have in the top division of 12 a European conference made up of, in the first instance, the Six Nations teams, a rest of the world conference made up of the 4 rugby championship teams and 2 additional teams to be brought into that competition. If you think about the sort of flow of July and November, you play 3 of the teams in the other conference in July and 3 in November, and then the top 2 teams, so the top team in the rest of the world conference and the top team in the European conference, play in a grand final.
Okay, I understand that. What I'm interested in is the grand final. Is this, are we going to see the evolution of a destination final, or will there be a mechanism to say that the Northern Hemisphere side's table is top or bottom or whatever? I mean, are we looking at Hong Kong or the Modi Stadium in India, or are we going to keep it within the family of the 12 in the league?
Yeah, at the moment, the intention is that obviously as teams from the rest of the world conference travel in November to play in the European conference destinations, that the grand final will take place in that European conference destination.
Alan, if this Nations Championship is expected to drive higher revenue, will there be, when it comes to those crossover fixtures in the other years, an obligation for the leading nations to visit the smaller nations? And also, will there be an obligation for revenue share from their home test rather than just the leading nations making extra money in those years?
We'd love that obligation to exist. I think it's about taking everyone with us on this. That's certainly the aim, is that we'll see, you know, the established nations travel and play where it's possible, because it's not always possible, in the home countries of the emerging nations in crossover matches, and obviously therefore to help drive revenues as a whole.
With the Nations Championship, are all the commercial rights going to be held solely by Six Nations and Rugby Championship, or will there be a World Rugby controller spreading the benefit more widely?
Yeah, there'll be some World Rugby involvement in that to make sure we fund Division 2 in the first instance, because it will be about expenditure rather than revenues in the early years while we establish this, and then work all together to drive the revenues and benefit for the benefit of all.
I do understand that it's a World Rugby press conference, but we are heading into the final and there is a huge cloud hanging over a South African player, and it could actually just be a misunderstanding of a word that is an Afrikaans word that when pronounced for English speakers sounds like a slur. The longer this is drawn out, the more that that player has negative press around him. Can we please get some indication as to when it will be solved, obviously in light of this fact?
I think we answered that question just now, actually. Appreciate the commentary around it, but obviously there's a process in place and we have to respect that process. Thank you. Final question from the back there.
Hello. I would like to know in your discussions with all the federations, how much championships and leagues were listened and what did they tell? I take, for instance, the French league, top 14, top 14. I heard that it was really difficult to bring them in about this new competition, and we can understand they have many players that plays in selections. So what can you tell us about those discussions with them?
Yeah, look, certainly not difficult to bring them in at all. LNR involved in every step of the discussions all through this process, you know, really probably the deepest consultation process we've ever done for anything we've worked on, certainly from a World Rugby perspective. LNR represented throughout, represented in every working group, fantastic contributors to that. So, you know, we commend them for that, representing a league that is currently very strong in global rugby and therefore very important to global rugby, and a nation with a very fast emerging professional women's competition. So in both of those conversations, really important. That's not to say they're happy with every part of the discussion. And again, you know, compromise has been required from everybody to get to where we've gotten to today. And that's what we've failed to do in the past, you know, is achieve that collaboration. So all the professional leagues in both the men's and women's games fully involved and fully involved in the discussions right through, and will be involved in the discussions that move forward on everything from player load to how a lot of these fixtures work.
Thanks. We're going to take a few questions from the chat online. So bear with me a second. Question for Alan from Dominique at L'Equipe. We've mentioned the 50% increase between the high performance and performance nations. Can we give more details to what that looks like, and have agreements been signed?
No agreements signed. Principles agreed about how those fixtures could be allocated, but a lot more work to do. And you know, a lot of this process in the last particularly 6 months was about getting to today and getting to decisions in principle for these competition models, recognizing that these competition models don't take effect until 2026. The next 6 months is really about working with regions, unions, and other stakeholders to nail down a lot of those details based on some pre-agreed principles.
Next question is from Vitas at Forbes. How does the creation of a new competition and the expansion of the Men's World Cup fit into World Rugby's environmental sustainability strategy? How are environmental concerns factored into the growth of the global game?
That's a great question. There's been a lot of discussion actually in the sort of conceptual planning for an additional global competition about how you do that in a responsible way, you know, both in terms of travel and is there a need for teams to play, you know, matches in a particular rhythm of tours to minimize sort of crisscrossing the globe. And again, look, more work to do certainly in that regard, but sensible planning. Actually expanding Men's World Cup into 6 pools of 4 provides some opportunities to play pool matches in a slightly different way and look at, you know, in a territory as vast as Australia is, actually the opportunity to think about player and fan movement slightly differently.
Thanks, Alan. Question from Steve at Rugby Asia 247. Can we say anything on the timeline for when the pathways for the second division of the proposed league will be confirmed, thinking about Asia specifically?
Look, I think the pathways will be confirmed in the next 6 months. That's kind of our commitment to everybody. We need to work through a Rugby World Cup 2027 qualification process quite quickly to establish how those next 12 teams, and including the additional 4, qualify. And that will have an impact on how those regional competitions feed into what will become the 12-team second division in the first instance in 2026 for the Nations Cup. So yeah, a lot of work to do, but quickly.
Thanks. We'll just take one more from chat. Elliot Smith, how comfortable is World Rugby with Sands or Six Nations running the top tier of the new competition, and the selection for the two new teams as part of that process will be dictated by Sansar?
I think, look, we're comfortable. We're working, we've worked collaboratively for 6 months. And again, that doesn't mean, to be clear, everybody agrees on everything. But we've worked really closely together. We'll work closely together on what that competition model looks like. We've worked closely together on what the admission of two further teams looks like, and we'll work closely on the commercial rights around those two divisions. So I think we're confident.
Okay, thank you. And we've got one with a hand up there. I believe it's Ignacio Chans. Can we allow him in, Dorian?
Hello, are you hearing me?
Yes, we are, Ignacio. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dom. You said that the new plan allows more crossover games, but the Nations Cup plan states that only 2 Tier 2 countries will have 5 games in a 4-year cycle against Nations Cup teams. Another 2 countries will have 3 games in a 4-year cycle. And that includes playing against Tier 2 countries that play in the first division of Nations Cup, possibly Fiji and Japan. That it isn't more games against top teams. It is less games than today, and with no commercial benefits for Tier 2 countries. How does indeed helps Tier 2 countries?
Ignacio, do you want to start with that, Alan?
I'm not really sure I understand the question, but because we haven't confirmed which.
Well, the question was about the plan that it was circulated, the document that was circulated between the unions, the 27 crossover tests that were talked about in the previous discussions. There were 27 crossover tests that you were negotiating between unions. That's right?
Correct, yeah. An increase of 50% from the current 18 to 27 minimum crossover fixtures, but they haven't been allocated to particular teams yet, Ignacio.
No, but there was a plan that the 2 top teams of the Challenger tournament would play 3 tests in Lions year and 1 test maybe in the Rugby World Cup year. So that would be 4 games or 5 games in a 4-year cycle, and the second teams of the Challenger tournament would play two games in the 4-year cycle. So, 3 games, 3 games including Rugby World Cup year. I see 5 games for 2 top Challenger teams and 3 games for second Challenger teams. It's less games, it's not more games.
That detail that you're describing is not confirmed as part of today's plans.
So you can assure that those Tier 2 countries will play more games than they were playing in the previous 4-year cycle?
On aggregate, the teams in Division 2 of the Nations Cup will play 50% more crossover matches against teams in Division 1 of the Nations Cup than exists in the current, what we describe as San Francisco Agreement.
Thanks, Ignacio. That's our final question. Maybe I'll just leave the final words to Bill, just to sum up, and then we'll close.
Well, thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much, Alan. I think today is an exciting day. That it's, I think, to sum it up, Alan said, not everybody is in 100% agreement. So, there's been a lot of give and take all round to get to this position that Woking 2007 seems a very, very long time ago. I was there as a very young man then, and also chaired the meeting in San Francisco, where again we looked at the global calendar, and I think this is a quantum leap forward for the game. It's not just about the guys at the top of the table. This gives opportunity to every single country playing rugby around the globe. So something that we're all immensely proud of.
Thanks, Bill. That draws us to a close. Just to remind you that recording will be made available via the Media Zone in due course. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. Enjoy the weekend, and see you soon.